What is going on, snooker fans? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are finally going to be reviewing this year's Snooker World Championship. It's a bit of a belated video. For such a huge snooker fan, I made a massive blunder with my calendar this year where I missed sort of parts of the semi-final and the final, and then decided just to bookmark my calendar for the next 2 weeks after the World Championship. So I've not really had the chance to process the tournament as a whole and get this video out. But it is time to do that now, and Kyren Wilson, that man in your picture, for the first time got his hands on the trophy. And we'll get to Kyren later in the video, but it really was sort of an action-packed 17 days of snooker, as it always is at the World Championship. And I don't think it was necessarily the highest quality tournament we've ever seen. There wasn't as many centuries in the tournament, but that's just one statistic. I think overall the standard wasn't as amazing as we've seen it before. If you ask me to name some of the highest quality tournaments that I've personally seen, I would instantly think of 2011, 2018, 2014, years where multiple players were playing really well at the tournament. This year, the quality wasn't quite there. But what we did have were plenty of storylines. We had that John Higgins clearance. We had so many qualifiers, shock seeds throughout the tournament. And then also off the table, unfortunately, there was all the talk about the Crucible and the future of the World Championship. And that's something that I'll be doing a video on later. But to sort of break it down, I'm going to first look at the qualifiers. Before the tournament started, everyone was saying this feels like the best group of qualifiers to ever make to the Crucible. The strongest lineup. And that's been said kind of year after year after year. And it gets a bit rehearsed and it gets a bit tiring. But this year, to be fair, it has to be said it was accurate, wasn't it? Of the 16 first round matches, 8 qualifiers won to get to the second round. 4 qualifiers made it to the quarterfinals. 3 qualifiers made it to the semi-finals. And then, of course, Jak Jones made it to the final as well. And there were so many good performances coming from those qualifiers. And this is even without players like Neil Robertson, Anthony McGill making it. But a qualifier that, of course, stands out is Jak Jones making it to the final. And it was just a remarkable performance. Again, I think he got slagged off a little bit too much, and very unfairly in my opinion. I know there's a lion's share of snooker fans that prefer fast-paced, free-flowing kind of snooker, and Jak Jones admittedly isn't that kind of player. And obviously, if that's the way you prefer to watch the sport, you're entirely entitled to that opinion. But unfortunately, not every snooker player can play that way. Not everyone is O'Sullivan, Trump, etc. Jak Jones is obviously much more measured, much more safety orientated, the kind of player that unfortunately a demographic of snooker fans aren't going to warm to. But I thought he was, so solid. Last year was impressive enough. Not only qualifying, beating Barry Hawkins to qualify, not only beating Ali Carter, beating Neil Robertson, and then pushing Mark Allen really close in the quarterfinals. He then followed that up this year. And the funny thing is, I still personally think he played slightly better last year than he did this year. But what he is, he's just so remarkably difficult to beat. Very much in that kind of Anthony McGill sort of style of player. And looking at his tournament, he beat Zhang Anda. And to be fair, Zhang Anda put up very little resistance. Jak didn't really have to perform. He just had to not make too many unforced errors, and he would have won comfortably, and that's exactly what he'd done. His match against Si Wei, again, was a match that was littered with mistakes from both. It was a huge match for both players. But then from then on, I think from the quarterfinals onwards, you kind of backed him to lose every single time. The match against Judd Trump, you kept thinking at some point Judd Trump is going to click and he's going to pull away. And that never happened. And every match I watched, I just thought, if a player can't get on top of Jak Jones early, if you allow Jak Jones to get his sort of claws into the match, he will drag you into the type of match that you really don't want to be involved in. It happened to Judd Trump, and particularly it happened to Stuart Bingham as well. Bingham was 3-0 up, had a massive opportunity to go 4-0 up, missed a blue off the spot. Jak Jones makes a really good clearance to get his first frame on the board. And, even though that's the 4th frame in a best of 33, it was massive because then Jak Jones could just get a hold of the match, get a grip of the match and start dictating the way the match was played. And ultimately got a thoroughly deserved win over Stuart Bingham. And unfortunately for him, I don't think his standard dropped too much in the final compared to what he'd been producing all week. But he was just up against a player that was finally able to sort of get on top of him. Something that Judd Trump couldn't do, Kyren Wilson couldn't do, Saishu Wee couldn't do. But, take nothing away from that performance from Jak Jones. Now into the top 16, 2 times at the Crucible, he's made a quarterfinal and a final. It's a stunning record. I'm sure people will start be saying, well, he's going to be a world champion in the future. Nothing like that is ever guaranteed in this sport. But what you do have there is a man who is clearly best suited for the longer format and the big occasions. And now it's just a question of, can he translate the results in one venue, the Crucible, into every single tournament he plays throughout the course of a season? And of course, he's going to have the added pressure next season of being a seed and the potential of qualifying for the UK Championship, for the Masters, for the World Championship again. There's so many more aspects to next season for Jak than he would have ever had to experience before. So it'll be interesting to see what he does next season. But, for a World Championship perspective, a very, very good performance. But then on the flip side of that, you had top players, players who people would have backed highly to go really deep into the tournament, never really produced at the World Championship, particularly Judd Trump and Ronnie O'Sullivan. Now, getting to a quarterfinal at the Crucible is not a bad performance. You've had to win 5 sessions, or play through 5 sessions, win 2 multi-session matches to get there. But the performances from both were never really close to anything that they produced all season. And I kept thinking it was the same for Judd against Jak and the same for Ronnie against Stuart. You kind of just felt like at some point one of these two is just going to find that gear to be able to pull away. It's what they've done all season. But they were just never able to do it last week or two weeks ago. Starting with Judd, he was pretty measured in his win against Hussein Fafai. He was pretty solid again against Tom Ford, but never really done anything special. And I kept saying, I think that's a really positive sign because it's not how you start the tournament, it's how you finish it. And, he had so many gears to go through. The only problem there is if you don't find the extra gears and you stay in sort of second, third gear, at some point you will get found out. And that is what happened to both of these guys. Judd against Jak Jones, obviously Judd would be in heavy favour. And how Judd Trump fans would have felt during that match is exactly how I felt 12 months ago watching Robertson against Jak Jones. 2 contrasting styles of play. Judd, I think, is a far better safety player than people give him credit for. But he's obviously at his best when he's in the balls and he's scoring. And that's the same thing for Neil Robertson. And you just want to say, just be more aggressive. Put it to Jak Jones. Take on your shots. If you miss them and you leave Jak in the balls and he clears up, okay. But ask the question of him, because that if you get the long pots and you get in, you back yourself to score and you're going to put pressure on Jak. And it's just something that Judd could never do this year. Neil Robertson couldn't do last year. And that'll be the disappointing thing for Judd, because he kind of went out with a bit of a whimper. Now, that doesn't take away from what he's achieved this season. 5 titles in a single season is incredible. And the fact that he's done it 3 times in his career is even more incredible. And Judd has said, he would rather win 5 random tournaments than just 1 world championship in a season. People probably would have had their own comments about that. But, that's how Judd views it. And he's perfectly entitled to feel that way. The only thing is, obviously, with Judd, is people will continue to question the amount of Triple Crown events that he's won. So he's currently got 4, 2 Masters, 1 UK, 1 World Championship. And I mean, again, that's by no mean like a modest feat. That's pretty good. But people just expect him to be winning and winning and winning all of these. And he's got so much time. That's the thing with Judd Trump. He has so much time on his hands. He's in his mid-30s. He'll be seeing what O'Sullivan is doing, John Higgins, Mark Williams. Those guys are pushing 50. So if Judd Trump can do that as well, he's got another sort of 15 years at least at the top of the game to win as many of these big tournaments as he can. And at some point, O'Sullivan, Williams, Higgins, the class of 92, they're going to fade away. And then there's players a generation above him, players like Mark Selby, Sean Murphy, Neil Robertson. They'll fade away before he does as well. So, you know, his main challenges to titles at the moment, he's got the time on his side. So, you know, there's certainly no room to panic. I don't think he will be. 4 Triple Crown events is a massive achievement. And, you know, I'm absolutely positive he'll win more. And then, you know, O'Sullivan as well. It kind of felt written in the stars, at least for me, that he would win the 8th World Championship this year. It wasn't meant to be. It was disappointing from him, though. I didn't particularly like his comments about the World Championship. Again, you know, that's an opinion that he's entitled to. And his whole view on moving the tournament to Saudi Arabia, that's a topic for another video that I will make in the coming weeks. But on the table, it was pretty poor. He never really got going. You know, the match against Ryan Day in the second round, Ryan Day had more than enough chances. You know, O'Sullivan won, I think it was 13-6, 13-7 in the end. It should have been a much closer match than that. Ryan just kept gifting him chances. But every credit to Bingham. In that quarterfinal, he stood up to the pressure. You know, he was 3-1 up. Then O'Sullivan went 4-3 ahead, and that could have sort of knocked him, but it didn't. But without a doubt, the main thing was O'Sullivan won 2 massive frames to go 8-6 up in the second session. And it kind of felt like this could be the point where O'Sullivan starts to pull away. But it didn't. You know, Bingham won the last 2 to get it back to 8-all. And then in the final session, he was the dominant force, much like he was in their 2015 quarterfinal as well. You know, thoroughly deserved from Bingham. And the only disappointment from Stuart Bingham's point of view in the tournament is after getting that big win against O'Sullivan, he couldn't make it to the final with a shot to win a second world title. You know, imagine that. Imagine us talking now as Stuart Bingham, a multiple world champion. You know, something Neil Robertson, Judd Trump, Sean Murphy, etc. haven't done. But he couldn't quite sort of do that again against Jak Jones. But, you know, to take nothing away from him, he was fantastic. O'Sullivan, again, you know, same as Judd, a poor sort of finish to the season, doesn't detract from all the amazing things that he'd done. Winning 5 titles again, including the UK and the Masters, is an incredible feat. Very close to winning the Triple Crown in one season. But it wasn't meant to be. And, you know, he'll say he's not entirely disappointed. I'm sure there was a little bit of disappointment because he would have seen the headlines there. But again, O'Sullivan's not going anywhere. He's going to have another few cracks at an 8th world title. And, you know, I'm not saying that's a certainty, but he's always going to be there or thereabouts. And, you know, it wasn't just O'Sullivan and Judd. There were other, you know, star players of the season who just never got going at the World Championship. Zhang Anda, you know, what an unbelievable underdog season he had, but he just never ever settled in that first round match. Gary Wilson, the same. He had a fantastic season, 2 titles, never settled against Stuart Bingham. Mark Allen, you know, fancied him heavily, and, you know, okay, there's no shame in losing to John Higgins in the second round. And, you know, talking about John Higgins, that clearance he made to win the decider was just a thing of absolute snooker beauty. You know, Mark Allen was, 61 points ahead, overcut a red of the rest, looked like he had covered it. Higgins pulls out just a John Higgins-esque double, clears the table, just a phenomenal feat. And the thing is, that overshadowed what he'd done in the frame before that as well. Obviously, Mark Allen was 1 frame away from victory, leading 12-11. And Higgins potted a really great green got perfectly onto the brown to clear up, forced the decider. And yeah, what he done in the decider was incredible. I know he went and lost in the next round, but that was just that thing where you're just like, whenever you doubt one of the class of the 92, they just always produce something, and you're just like, they've still got it, guys. They've still got it. It was incredible. But going back to Mark Allen, he will be disappointed, of course. As particularly, it was an unbelievable clearance, but John Higgins really should never have had the chance to make that clearance. Mark Allen was in with that really good chance. Overcut was effectively for him a match ball. And yeah, he was another player. He had a really great season and just sort of couldn't get going at the World Championship. But it was just one of those years. One of those years where it was more about the underdog stories. And talking about underdog stories, you've got another new world champion in Kyren Wilson. And okay, this wasn't a huge surprise. I backed Kyren to do really well this year. I just felt like he was coming into form. And I've never seen him look so focused at an event before. He's always been a challenger at the World Championship. I talked about that incredible record that he had between something like 2016 and 2021, where he was just making quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals. But just from ball one, he looked just on it at the World Championship. It was an incredible performance. He dismantled Dominic Dale, dismantled Joe O'Connor. Like, no one got near him. And, I don't use Twitter anymore, but I can imagine that there will be the typical tweets saying things like, Kyren Wilson's only won this because he's had an easy route. And, okay, you can't discount the fact that he did only beat one top 16 player, and that was John Higgins, the 13th seed in the quarterfinals. And, he beat Dominic Dale, who he would have backed to win, beat Joe O'Connor, the debutant, but Joe O'Connor beat Mark Selby, and then David Gilbert and Jak Jones to win a world championship. It's not the kind of route to a world title that many people would have envisaged, but that doesn't matter. You can only beat who's in front of you. It doesn't take anything away from the world championship. Whether you beat the top 5 players in the world or you beat a group of qualifiers, your name is still on the trophy at the end of the day. It's not your fault that your fellow top players couldn't beat the players that you beat. That's not your fault, that's theirs. And if the route becomes slightly easier for you on paper, then it's your job to take full advantage of that. That's what players do in tournaments all around the world every single year. And look, by that logic, take away Neil Robertson's world title. He only beat one top 16 player, and he had to beat players like, Fergal O'Brien, Martin Gould, Steve Davis in the quarterfinals. It really is a silly argument. And like, maybe people aren't making those assumptions, but I can guarantee that they are, and it's really frustrating. It doesn't take anything away from his performances. And like I say, he was just on it from ball one, dismantled Dominic Dale. And no one really ever got close to him. Jak Jones obviously got close to him towards the end of the final, but it was a final that he was always in control of. John Higgins, I suppose in that match, he was 5-1 up, became 5-3. He was 9-5 up, it became 9-7. There were plenty of chances where it looked like Kyren was going to properly pull away from Higgins. Higgins kept digging in, but Kyren still had just plenty in the tank to beat him comfortably. Beat David Gilbert comfortably in the semi-final, even though it was a really close start to the match. I think they were 8-all. And both players were just trading frames with like centuries, 80 breaks, 70 breaks. It was a really good semi-final for the first half. And then Kyren just pulled away. And the only time Kyren really had poor sessions was probably the final day of the final, because understandably, he realises that this is the day where he could achieve like his boyhood lifetime ambitions of being a snooker world champion. And he had such a good chance to do it. He had a massive lead. And, there were times when Jak Jones was pulling it back, that you kind of thought, if the unthinkable happens here and Jak Jones somehow wins this from 17-11 down, this could be the kind of scar that someone just can't ever get over. similar to, what happened to Jimmy White back in the 80s. That kind of moment. But he got his chance, held it together pretty well. And, it wasn't the highest quality final in the world. But again, it had storylines, and that's the most important thing. It's always nice to have the quality and those incredible matches where players just go blow for blow for blow. But, it's a world championship between two players who had never won it before. The first time since 2005 that we had two finalists that both of them had never won a world championship. So obviously there was going to be that added element of pressure because, okay, Jak Jones is the underdog, but typically you have one finalist who's won a world title or two versus someone who's never won it. So they typically are the favourite. You never really had that story this year. But every credit to Kyren. I think he's going to be a superb ambassador for the sport. I know he talked about being tempted to go to a breakaway tour, and I really hope that he doesn't. I really hope that he sticks to the main tour and becomes the ambassador that I think he's sort of born to be. He'll play in everything. He'll give everything, his full focus, his full attention, and, absolutely every credit to him. And what that also means is, for the first time since 2014, 2015, we've got back-to-back first-time winners. Obviously, Luca Brissell won it last year, Kyren Wilson won it this year. 2014 was when we had Selby, and then Bingham won it the following year. All that means is next year the Crucible Curse will be coming back out again. There's absolutely no chance that Kyren Wilson will be winning it next year. But he won't care one jot about that. It was a fantastic performance and, just a thoroughly deserved world champion. And with that, rounds off what has been a really good season. It's been a season dominated by two players, but other players have had their say as well. But the moment belongs to Kyren Wilson. He's going to treasure that moment all summer, and he's going to come back next season with that added pressure of being a world champion, potentially gunning for the world number one spot. He'll be in contention for that as well. But it's time for a snooker break. I do love my snooker, but the summer months, I do like just to kind of zone out. No need to watch sort of snooker highlights, just be done with the sport for a few weeks and then get back into it sort of towards the end of summer when the season starts up again. Looking at the provisional season, sort of the tournaments next year, it does look pretty stacked. More stacked than it was this season. So that's exciting. There's going to be more snooker for us to enjoy and more snooker for me to preview and review and sort of divulge in and analyse, which I can't wait for. But for now, it's definitely time for a rest. Hopefully the English summer does produce a little bit more sun than it did last year so that we can get out and, maybe enjoy a bit of the outside world instead of being glued to a TV screen for hours on end. I will still have content to come out. I'm going to sort of review the season in general, make some awards for players. I am going to talk about the future of the World Championship as well. So there's plenty of content for me to make between now and the new season. But until then, enjoy your summer, guys. It's been a fantastic season. This is something that I've wanted to do for a while, and I've never been dedicated enough to do it, which is just make snooker content regularly. I tried years ago, back when I was at university, and I never really committed fully to it. But this is what I love. This is what I always talk about, is snooker, and it's lovely to have an outlet. I hope you guys are enjoying the content too. There'll be more to come, like I say, over the summer and next season as well. But until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.